Morning team. So Jonathan has asked me today to share a little bit about what we did with our recent client, Dough Magic. So if you bear with me, I'll just share screen. We'll go through and I'll share a little bit about what we were sharing with the client. So a little bit of background about what we did. So we ran through a few key concepts, a bit of background about the case. So there were three partners in the company, or in the firm. So there was Giovanni, Mick, and Leanne. So Giovanni was a seasoned chef, a pizza chef. He's been working for 10 plus years, and he's wanted to start his own company now. So he's invited Mick and Leanne, his uncle and auntie, to help out with a bit of capital to put forward to start up this firm. So the firm's Dough Magic, a pizza company. So and in that case, as part of the business, they've employed Fabio, and in his employment contract, they included a non-competition clause after he finished. And when he finished, he supposedly breached that contract and started off a company called Kings of Dough, competing against Dough Magic. So what we did was provide some advice to Giovanni, Mick, and Leanne when they came to us, just seeing the business structures and what their options were. So we ran through the basic structures, so sole trader, partnerships, trusts in the company. So we didn't really focus much on sole trader and the partnerships. Most of our focus was on the trust in the company. Just to reiterate that point of the separate legal entity, that was a focal point of our discussions. Really focusing on how the components of that would benefit those clients. So especially the limited liability. So all the liabilities compared to a sole trader and a partnership, they're personally liable or jointly and severally liable. That means all assets under their names can be used in court of law to recover any bad debts from the personal owners that are in the partnership or other sole traders. But compared to a trust and a company, they're directors of the entity. So it's a person of itself, the entity, either a trust or a company. So they're a different entity. They can act by themselves. So there's a limited liability there. So if they're, say for example, one of the directors goes into bankruptcy, the company's assets cannot be used or cannot be recovered by the bank or the creditors to pay off the director's personal debts. Whereas a partner or a sole trader, if the assets are under their personal name, banks and creditors can come back and go into the firm or the sole trading business and sell off the assets in that to recover the debt. So that's a quick example there that I've explained. A case that really highlights this principle is Salomon and Salomon. So in this case, Andrew Salomon created a new company to protect his personal assets. So he was in sole proprietorship beforehand, but seeing that his company was going into liquidation, he created a company purposely. The court found purposely that he created that company to use that separate legal entity concept to really separate his assets from his personal name so that the assets won't get sold. The court overruled that and found him guilty, and that's another principle in itself. But I'll just explain this other case that we presented, this Guildford Motor Company in Horn. So Horn was involved in, this is similar to the Dough Magic case. Horn in his employment contract had a non-competition clause in there that said he can't start a company that competes against the Guildford Motor Company. So after he got fired, he went on to create a company to compete against Guildford Motor Company, and which the court found breached his competition clause. By both of these cases purposely used the separate legal entity concept, because Horn, while he was personally restricted, according to his employment contract, he was restricted personally. If he created a company, there was a separate legal entity there. So the company was a separate legal entity to Horn himself. So the company could run a business, but Horn personally couldn't. So he couldn't run a sole trader business, or he couldn't run a partnership, because that would have breached the contract. So using that separate legal entity concept, he used a company to compete against Guildford Motor Company. But there's a concept here, there's an exception to the separate legal entity rule known as piercing or lifting the corporate veil. So especially highlighted in both those cases, but in Horn, the courts found that Horn was guilty of creating a company purposely to to avoid this contract and to avoid the clause. So this is a similar concept in what Fabio did in the Dough Magic situation. Fabio created a company and later on competed against Dough Magic. They came to us with some thoughts and a question of what structure to recommend to them. We put forward a trust structure to recommend to them. So a family trust or a discretionary trust would be flexible enough to income split. And they were looking for protection of assets. So a trust is a separate legal entity. So they could be, that we could create a corporate trustee and they could be directors of the corporate trustee and they can be beneficiaries as well. So in that case, they have protection of assets, but they still get the income and they can, depending on the trustee, they can have certain rules in there that determine all the details of the trust. Yes, it's a little bit higher setup costs at the start, but it'll be worth it for the long-term safety of their assets. Say if it costs more in the setup, it'll save, and if compared to if they run a sole trader or if they run a partnership, if there's liability that come up from there, it'll be way more than setting up the trust itself. So based on that, we recommend that structure and you provided those details forward. So thanks for listening.